Sodom and Gomorrah, a tale told for millennia. Two once great cities reduced to nothing but ash and glass in mere seconds. Many think this is a parable, invented by storytellers to teach lessons and impart wisdom. But, in actuality, there is proof of their existence, and proof of their instantaneous demise. I will be mainly using the Lexham English Bible due to my belief in its accuracy, but when researching I also cross-reference with the New American Standard Bible and the English Standard Version. I may swap out certain words, but I will always let you know when and why. Sodom and Gomorrah were sister cities, each their own city-state. This was because it was a time when most kingdoms were still city-states. Combined with Admah, Zeboiim, and Zoar, also known as Bela, they made up the 5 cities of the plain. We know they were called such because of 2 verses, Genesis 13:12 and Genesis 19:29. Genesis 13:12 says, Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in or among the cities of the plain, and moved his tents as far as Sodom. This is when Lot left his uncle, then named Abram but later Abraham, due to their shared wealth and livestock being too much for one land to handle. Genesis 19:29 says, Thus it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. This verse is provided as a conclusive summary of the events that had unfolded. Now, in 2 of the 3 translations I am sourcing from, they say cities of the valley instead of cities of the plain. This is in the New American Standard Bible and the English Standard Version, but not the Lexham English Bible. I'm going to keep the word plain, which is the traditional translation. This newer mistranslation seems to be caused by 3 things. A modern archaeological find that was misinterpreted, the fact the plain is in a valley, and a mistranslation of the ancient Hebrew word hakiker, which is directly translated to roundabout place. Today the word seems to be used for a town square, but that is only going off of all the Google results of famous town squares when I looked up the word. Google Translate also comes back as square, but that's Google Translate. I have also seen it be used for the shape of a circle. The ancient Hebrew translation of roundabout place can easily mean both plain and valley, but Genesis 14 puts this debate to rest when it uses a different word for valley. When Genesis 14:3 mentions the valley of Sodom, it uses the word Amek for valley, not Hakiker. However, biblical historians may have taken it to mean valley when a city they once incorrectly thought was Sodom was discovered in a valley that was not a plain. But we'll go over that later in the video. For now, just know that every instance of valley I keep to plain as in other, older Bibles. They were by no means new players on the map, but were in fact very ancient already. We know this because of a fantastic find in 1974 of a very ancient city and kingdom called Ebla. More specifically, 4 ancient archives inside of a fallen palace of this once great city. Ebla was discovered in Tel Mardik in modern-day northeastern Syria. In archaeology, a mound made from the remains of a past civilization's ruins is called a tell, which is derived from an Arabic word meaning mound or small hill. It is called Tel Mardik because this tell was found in close proximity to the modern village of Mardik. Ergo, Tel Mardik is essentially another modern scientific name for what is really Ebla, an archaeological label if you will. Ebla was once itself a great kingdom of the early Bronze Age. It eventually fell to Akkad, but before it fell, its last 3 kings each continued building upon 4 archives of their own history, and the history of the world as they knew it. I don't know why they had this sudden urge in their final decades, but thankfully they did. However, that was not all. They also had a good proportion of tablets that were for system keeping purposes. These were things like what rituals were given to which gods, what was to be used for the rituals, imports, exports, trading partners, etc. As you can imagine, this find completely rocked the archaeological world. There are about 15,000 tablets, both whole and fragmented, that have been found in these archives. To help date when these were written, we can use names found on the tablets. Two of these were Khufu and Pepi I, Egyptian pharaohs of the 4th and 6th dynasties respectively. There appears to be no later Egyptian ruler after Pepi I. This demonstrates just how ancient this was, as the 6th dynasty began and ended in the 3rd millennium BC. Specifically, it went from 2345 to 2181 BC. Archaeologists use these names and thousands of other documents to help approximate when they were written and when the palace was destroyed. Originally, it was thought the Akkadians, led by either Sargon or his grandson, who both mentioned conquering Ebla, destroyed the palace. However, it now seems the palace was destroyed in an accident or from arson by Eblaite citizens. We can infer this based on some of the latter documents which mention the king of Mari as alive and well. Mari was a kingdom conquered by Sargon before he reached Ebla, which we know based on geographical paths. Mari was between the two. If the ruler was alive and in charge, Sargon wasn't there when the palace burned. Not a single tablet mentions Sargon or the Akkadian Empire, further giving credence to the idea that this was before. Another thing archaeologists used to date them was not what they said, but how they said it. Archaeologists noted the phonology and composition of these tablets were most similar to already dated tablets found in Mari, Kish, and other kingdoms from before the Akkadian Empire. One cool tidbit that is not related to Sodom, but which I found rather interesting, is that some tablets were discovered still on their tables, seemingly mid-creation. Some think this could be due to the scribes being caught off guard. Truly ominous implications. That dark thought aside, we know the approximate time period of when these tablets were created, around 2400 to 2300 BC, and how we've figured that out. Definitely very interesting stuff, but what does that have to do with Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, here's where it gets even more interesting. The Ebla tablets don't contain much, especially compared with what was initially reported, but they do contain a possible place name, one that I believe is connected, else I'd not mention it in this video. In a tablet once claimed to contain all 5 cities of the plain in the same order as in Genesis by its original decipherers, who have since walked back such claims, there is still one name that everyone agrees is present. That name is Saduma or Sidama. Many believe this is Sodom, although it is admittedly greatly contested. However, one should know that just about every single discovery backing the Bible has been greatly contested before being verified by either peer review or additional evidence. Given Sodom was the leader in the Bible, it makes sense that it would be the oldest and could stretch back this far. Okay, so there were the 5 cities of the plain: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar. Sodom and Gomorrah appear to have been the greatest, while Zoar was referred to as little by Lot in Genesis 19:20. The period was between 1800 BC and 1650 BC. During this age, Mesopotamia and Canaan were both divided into a myriad of many city-states like those of the plains. We can tell this is when these events took place from 2 points of reference: a king of Babylonia and a certain recent find we will get into later. First, to find this king, let's look at one of these events. In Genesis 14, there was a massive war for its time, called the War of 9 Kings. For 12 years, the cities of the plain had been subservient to the king of Elam, a large kingdom around the Persian Gulf whose capital was Susa. In the 13th, they rebelled. So the king of Elam, King Chedorlaomer, gathered up his allies, the kings of Shinar and Elasar to his close west, and Goyim in modern-day Turkey. They went on a warpath, defeating several other groups that may have joined the cities or may have just been in the way. Eventually, the 5 cities gathered their armies in the valley of Siddim, directly south of the Dead Sea, and there they confronted the 4 kings. The battle was long and the fighting ruthless, but eventually the 4 northern kings succeeded and the cities of the plain fled to the mountains. The 4 kings marched northward to the cities for their goods, and they seized their people and possessions with Lot among them. When Abram heard of this, he amassed a small army of 318 of his men and pursued them all the way north to Dan, where he ambushed them at night and routed them. Then he pursued them all the way north to Hobah, defeated them a second time, and took back all of the possessions, Lot, and the people they had taken. The king of Sodom, to his credit, went to Abram and asked only for his people back. The possessions, he said, Abram could keep for himself. However, Abram pulled the ultimate flex for God, saying, "I have raised my hand to Yahweh, God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, that neither a thread nor a thong of a sandal would I take from all that belongs to you, that you might not say, I made Abram rich. Nothing besides what the servants have eaten and the share of the men who went out with me will I take. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share." And after the men who had fought had taken their share, Abram took not a thing for himself, giving it all back to the kings of the plain. We'll be going more into this later on, as it actually really helps us determine the location of the 5 cities as well. Plus, I gotta admit, I've always been extremely fascinated by ancient historical warfare. For now, I just want to focus on the very first verse, Genesis 14:1. And it happened that in the days of Amraphel, the king of Shinar, Arioch, the king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, the king of Goyim, made war. So much can be gleaned from just this verse, along with knowledge of the greater context that this was Elam's war. Firstly, what has caught the eye of scholars is the order of the list. King Amraphel is first, despite Elam clearly being the greater power. This most likely means one or both of two things. This event was passed down through Shinar to Moses, and or Amraphel is the most notable of the kings, in spite of the fact that he was not at the time. Now, I do not think this was taken from Shinar. The only other evidence of that theory is when Abram is referred to as Abram the Hebrew in Genesis 14:13. Hebrew is a term almost always only used by foreigners or descendants of Abraham speaking to foreigners, so to call Abram a Hebrew here greatly suggests the source for this passage is outside of Abraham's people. However, against this is the fact that ancient kings had a massive proclivity to whitewash or outright erase military defeats, as well as the fact that it being made by an outsider to the Israelites doesn't really narrow it down by any means. It could have been Mamre's people, Salem, etc. This event affected much of Canaan, the Hittites in Turkey, and most, if not all, of Mesopotamia. But then, how could Amraphel be the most notable when he fought on behalf of Chedorlaomer? Well, not only could this work solely with one king that we know of, but it would work perfectly. His name was Hammurabi. Hammurabi, whom you may know from his famous Code of Laws, was an early Babylonian king that reached legendary status in the eyes of his contemporaries and their descendants. The 3 primary reasons being his military prowess, diplomatic mastery, and, just like today, his Code of Laws. Combined, these allowed him to create the first known Babylonian empire, which was called Babylonia. So, how do we know Amraphel was Hammurabi? Not only does the place and name match up, but so do the story details. For the place, Babylon was in the land of Shinar, which we can see in Daniel 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, brought them to the land of Shinar to the temple of his gods. And as for the name Amraphel, while seemingly being an obviously vastly different name from Hammurabi, can actually be traced back to that name. Many names are changed around based on languages and dialects, getting converted and reconverted until sometimes it's an entirely different name. We actually see this all the time with English names of biblical figures. For example, Jesus' real name was Yeshua and Elijah's was Eliyahu. There is quite a lot of contention as to the etymology, aka historical background, of Hammurabi's name, but the 3 biggest theories all agree it's Akkadian, only disagreeing on its roots. The first one is based on a Hellenistic era Babylonian scribe named Berosus of the 3rd century BC. Berosus, a priest of Marduk, was tasked with writing a composition of Babylon's history by the Seleucid king Antiochus I Soter. This work, History of Babylonia, is lost, but fragments remain in citations of the work by others such as Eusebius and Josephus. Berosus considered Hammurabi's name to be foreign and equated it with the Babylonian Kimta-Rapashtum, which we know means great family or my family is widespread. This would mean that the Rabi comes from the Akkadian Rabu, which means to be great or big, and the prefix Hamu comes from the Akkadian word Hamu, which can mean family or, more directly, head of the family. The other two theories dispute Berosus' translation, pointing out that Babylonians during that age were notoriously unreliable historians due to their apathy towards it. They say that Berosus' work seems to echo this by greatly skimming through details to instead focus on historical similarities between periods, seemingly reflecting an astrological belief of history's cyclical repetition as the main focus of the work. Both of these theories at least partially agree with his translation, however. The second theory agrees with the prefix being from Akkadian Hamu, but believes it's a focus on head of the family, and then posits that Rabi comes from the Akkadian word Rapi, which means healer. So, my kinsman is a healer. The third theory instead agrees with the suffix being from Akkadian Rabu, but disagrees on the prefix, which it instead asserts comes from the root of Amu or Am, the name of an ancient deity that has been otherwise forgotten. Ergo, Amu is great, or Am is great. The first two theories are by far the most likely. I can find no other record of such a god, whereas the Akkadian word Hamu has actually survived into modern day, becoming Aamu in Arabic, which means paternal uncle. Both of them can be converted to Amraphel. Firstly, as both agree on Hamu, the Hebrew translation of what Hamu meant would be the word Am. Am meant nation, people, kinsman, etc., so it was practically a one-to-one match with Hamu. Now, this is just an educated guess, but due to their similar sound, I'd wager they share the same lost root. That's neither here nor there though. For the Raphael part, if Hammurabi came from the Akkadian word Rabu, then the Kimta-Rapashtum translation would therefore be correct. And the Rapashtum became Rapashtu before turning into the Assyrian Rapaltu, which meant loins, great, or large, which then became Raphael. If Hammurabi came from the Akkadian word Rapi, which means healer, then it simply got converted into the Hebrew Rapha, which also means healer. So we know his name fits into it, but does his story? Before the empire, there was only the city-state of Babylon itself. Hammurabi's grandfather and father both expanded the city's territory, so that it controlled around 2 or 3 other cities nearby. But it was by all means still a relatively small nation, in an area with a great multitude of them, when Hammurabi ascended the throne. Babylon was nothing close to a major player in regional politics. Had this Babylon been in Canaan, it would have perhaps been such a player. But in and around Shinar, which was the easternmost corner of Mesopotamia, there were much bigger fish. The biggest of these was none other than Elam. Elam was the dominant force of the entire region, and had been for some time. We even have a record of Hammurabi and other small kingdoms aiding Elam in a military campaign, much like the one depicted in the Bible. Eventually, however, the king of Elam tried to turn Hammurabi and his biggest rival, Rimsin of Larsa, against each other by promising each one his support should they do battle. Hammurabi uncovered this plot, and both kings turned against Elam. Very long story short, Hammurabi ousted Elam as the dominant power and went on to become it himself. He allowed its king to remain in power, and Elam continued to thrive, likely as either a vassal or puppet of Hammurabi, but this king was Suepalar-Kupak, not Chedorlaomer. However, Chedorlaomer's name has been proven to be Elamite in origin. He would be Kudur-Lagamar, which is Elamite for servant of Lagamar, a known Elamite god or goddess. I want to point out that all of this happened 30 years into Hammurabi's reign, and there are massive gaps of time in the surviving records for both kingdoms. Suepalar-Kupak was from the Sukoma dynasty, but it is a dynasty shrouded in almost complete mystery. We have the kings list built up, which Kudur-Lagamar doesn't show up on, but it would be very easy for him to slip into one of the many gaps. It should also be noted that Rimsin, Hammurabi's rival, was the younger brother of Warad-Sin, who ruled before him, and both were given the throne by their father, showing Warad-Sin died relatively young. This is important because Warad-Sin, on certain tablets, was called Ariaku. This would make him Ariaku king of Larsa, also known in the Bible as Arioch, king of Elasar. And as for title, king of the Goyim, historians have connected it with a Hittite name Tutalia, which would match with several Hittite kings. All of these kings are long after these events, but the name itself was in use at this time according to historian Massimo Forlanini. Some later imperial names are found already in Coltepe documents from the end of the 18th century. A Labarna, son of Massiet, witnessed the sale of the slave Tutalia. The Tutalia was chief cupbearer of the great king Zuzu, and he might be the Tutalia found with wife Anana and son Zuru in an Ikati document dated to the time of Zuzu, probably the last king of Canis. The name Tutalia is also found in a list of functionaries or members of the local nobility. This means all 4 kings are accounted for in this time period, 2 with known historical kings and 2 with known contemporary names, each belonging to their respective biblical region. So now we've got the when, and to some degree the who. But what about the where?